There is a river in western Turkey that still runs gold. Not metaphorically, not in legend, literally. The Pactolus River, descending from the slopes of Mount Tmolus to the ancient city of Sardis, carries in its sediment traces of Electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver that even today glitter faintly in the shallows when the light is right. For the ancient Lydians, this river was not a curiosity. It was the foundation of an empire. And from that foundation, they built something that would change the architecture of every human civilization that came after them. They invented money. Not barter, not commodity exchange, not rings of gold weighed on a scale. They invented the coin. A standardized, government-guaranteed, portable unit of value that a farmer, a soldier, a merchant, a king, a slave's owner could hold in one hand and know with certainty exactly what it was worth. We live in the world the Lydians made. Every transaction you have ever conducted, every salary, every purchase, every tax, every investment, every debt, descends in a direct and traceable line from a small, lumpy, lion-stamped disc of Electrum struck in the royal mint at Sardis sometime in the 7th century before the Common Era. Yet almost no one knows their name. This is their story, and it begins, as all the best stories do, not with a king, but with a craftsman. His name is Manes. He is not a character in any ancient text. He is not recorded in Herodotus, not praised in any inscription, not commemorated in any tomb we have found. He is the kind of man who appears only in the margins of history, or rather in the objects history leaves behind. But the coins he struck still exist. You can hold them in a museum today. Tiny, irregular, roughly oval, stamped on one face with a striding lion, on the other with two incused squares, the mark of a punch driven into the blank to confirm the coin's weight and authenticity. Somewhere in the mint at Sardis, in a workshop lit by the continuous heat of a small furnace, a man like Manes sat at a stone anvil, placed a measured pellet of Electrum on the lower die, positioned the upper die with practiced hands, and struck. Once. And the world changed. He didn't know that, of course. He was making coins. It was his job. He had a quota to fill, a king to serve, a family to feed. The philosophical implications of what he was doing, the way a small disk of stamped metal would reorganize human society more thoroughly than any army or any religion, were not his concern. His concern was the weight. Always the weight. Every Lydian stater, the standard coin of the realm, had to weigh exactly 8.1 grams. Not approximately, exactly, because the king's guarantee was stamped into the face of the coin, and if the coin was light, the king's word was light, and if the king's word was light, the entire system collapsed. Manes understood this in the way that all great craftsmen understand the moral weight of precision. The coin is not just metal, the coin is trust made portable, and trust, once broken, is the hardest thing in the world to reforge. To understand what the Lydians invented, you first have to understand what existed before. In the ancient Near East, economies ran on commodity exchange and weighed metal. If you wanted to buy something, you brought silver, rings, ingots, scraps, and weighed it on a balance scale against a known standard. The transaction worked, but it was slow, cumbersome, and vulnerable to fraud. A merchant could shave silver from a ring. A king could adulterate an ingot. The scale told you the weight, but it couldn't tell you the purity. The Lydians solved both problems simultaneously. By alloying their Electrum to a standardized composition and striking each pellet with a government die, they created an object whose value was guaranteed not by its raw weight alone, but by the authority of the state that issued it. The lion on the coin's face was not decoration, it was a warranty. This seems obvious to us. It is not obvious. It took the entire preceding history of human civilization, 5,000 years of trade, markets, silver rings, barter, and temple economics before anyone thought to do it. And when the Lydians did it, the effect was immediate and transformative. Sardis, already a substantial city, became a metropolis. Merchants who had previously needed portable scales for every transaction could now simply count. Soldiers who had previously been paid in rations or land grants could now be paid in coin, which meant they could buy their own supplies, which meant armies became mobile in entirely new ways. Tax collection, which had previously required armies of accountants weighing grain and silver, became simpler, more precise, more enforceable. Money, in other words, made everything faster, and speed in the ancient world was power. Let us pause here and look at Lydia itself, because the kingdom that invented money is as remarkable as its invention. Lydia occupied the western third of Anatolia, the great peninsula that bridges Europe and Asia, today the bulk of Turkey. Its northern boundary was roughly the Hermus River Valley, its southern the Meander. Its western edge touched the Aegean coast, where Lydian merchants rubbed shoulders with Ionian Greeks in cities like Ephesus and Miletus. Its eastern frontier was contested and shifting, pressed against the older kingdoms of Phrygia and beyond them the rising power of Persia. Geographically, Lydia was a gift. The Hermus Valley was fertile. The forests of Mount Tmolus provided timber and charcoal. The Aegean trade routes were within easy reach, and the Pactolus, the Gold River, ran right through the capital. Sardis sat at the foot of a great acropolis, a sheer-sided rocky spur rising nearly 400 meters above the valley floor. The lower city spread across the plain, workshops, markets, temples, homes. The upper citadel, virtually impregnable, housed the palace, the treasury, and the royal mint. At its height, Sardis was one of the great cities of the ancient world. Herodotus describes its luxury in language usually reserved for Babylon or Memphis. The Greeks considered it a wonder, a city of gold and perfumed air, where kings received ambassadors on jeweled thrones, and the markets sold goods from Egypt, Persia, India, and the Black Sea steppe. The Lydian kings of the Mermnad dynasty, Gyges, Sardis, Satiatis, Aliates, and finally Croesus, built this city over 5 generations. They were, by ancient standards, enlightened rulers. They patronized Greek oracles, especially Delphi. They maintained diplomatic relations with the Egyptian pharaoh Amasis. They sponsored the construction of enormous temple complexes dedicated to the goddess Cybele, whose worship they shared with the Phrygians and eventually exported to Greece and Rome. And they minted coins. First, Electrum staters, the natural alloy of the Pactolus. Then, under Croesus, something even more sophisticated, pure gold coins and pure silver coins struck separately, which could be exchanged at a fixed ratio. This was bimetallic currency, and it would define the monetary systems of Greece, Rome, Persia, and every successor civilization down to the modern era. Manes is at work. It is early morning in Sardis, that particular early morning of a Mediterranean summer when the air is still cool, but the light already has weight to it, falling in slanted columns through the doorway of the mint, catching the motes of metal dust that hang perpetually in the workshop air. The furnace has been burning since before dawn. The charge of Electrum, carefully measured, carefully alloyed to the royal standard, is molten in a crucible of fire-hardened clay. An assistant pours it into a series of small molds, each shaped to produce a blank of the correct weight. The blanks cool quickly in the morning air. Manes checks each one with a small bronze scale, the kind precise enough to measure fractions of a shekel. Most pass. A few are set aside, too heavy to be remelted, too light to be added to the next pour. This is not sloppiness. This is the system working as designed. Consistency is not achieved by perfection in every individual act. It is achieved by a process that catches and corrects imperfection before it escapes into the world. Manes has been doing this for 23 years. He learned the craft from his father, who learned it from his father, who, according to family legend, though Manes is skeptical of family legends, was present at the first striking under King Aliates, Croesus' father, when the decision was made to move from weighed Electrum to struck coins. Manes doesn't know if this is true. What he knows is the craft. The weight of the dies in his hands, the sound of a correct strike, a certain clear ring that differs from the dull thud of an off-center blow. The way the lion's face should emerge from the metal, sharp-featured and fierce, not smeared, not shallow. He takes pride in the lion's face. He knows that the coin will travel from the mint to the treasury, from the treasury to a soldier's pay, from the soldier's hands to a market stall, from the market to a Greek merchant's purse, from there to Ephesus or Corinth or beyond. He knows that many people will handle it. Most will not look at it closely, but some will. A jeweler, a tax collector, a foreign king's treasurer. And those people will judge the quality of the striking, and from that quality, they will judge the reliability of Lydia. The lion's face is Lydia's face. Manes will not smeared. To understand the Lydians fully, we need to understand the world they inhabited, which means we need to understand the 7th and 6th centuries BCE, one of the most extraordinary periods in human intellectual history. Karl Jaspers, the 20th century philosopher, called it the Axial Age, a period between roughly 800 and 200 BCE when independently and simultaneously cultures across the Eurasian landmass produced the foundational intellectual frameworks that would define civilized thought for the next 2 millennia. In China, Confucius and Lao Tzu were rethinking the nature of society and the cosmos. In India, the Buddha and the authors of the Upanishads were interrogating the nature of consciousness and liberation. In Persia, Zoroaster was formulating a dualistic theology of cosmic good and evil. In the Levant, the Hebrew prophets were articulating ethical monotheism. In Greece, the pre-Socratic philosophers of Miletus, Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes were inventing rational inquiry into the nature of the physical world. And in Lydia, they were inventing money. This is not a joke. Economic historians and anthropologists have argued seriously that coined money is as much a part of the Axial Age transformation as philosophy or religion. The invention of the coin changed not just how people traded, but how they thought about value, about abstract equivalence, about the relationship between the individual and the state, about what could be measured and what could not. Philosophy asks, what is the true nature of things? Money asked the same question in metal, and Lydia answered first. Let us talk about Croesus, because you cannot tell the story of Lydia without telling the story of its last and greatest king, the man whose name became a synonym for wealth so absolute it was almost comical. As rich as Croesus, the phrase that has survived in English, in French, in German, in dozens of languages for 25 centuries. Croesus came to the throne of Lydia around 560 BCE, following a brief and violent succession struggle. He was the son of Elaeus, who had already made Lydia the dominant power in western Anatolia, subduing most of the Ionian Greek cities and pushing Lydian power eastward against the Medes. Elaeus had been a great king. Croesus intended to be a greater one. He had the resources. Under Croesus, the Pactolus gold and the royal mints produced a torrent of coins, the famous Croesus gold staters, among the finest struck objects of the ancient world. He used this wealth to complete the subjugation of the Ionian Greeks, not by destroying their cities, but by incorporating them as tribute-paying allies, allowed their own institutions and laws, required only to acknowledge Lydian overlordship and pay into the royal treasury. This was, for the ancient world, a remarkably sophisticated policy. Croesus did not want to rule ruins. He wanted to rule prosperity, and then tax it. The Ionian Greeks, for their part, seem to have accepted this arrangement with more equanimity than later Greek historians like to admit. Croesus was not a tyrant in the Greek sense. He was generous, pious, and genuinely interested in Greek culture. He sent lavish gifts to Delphi, gold-plated statues, silver bowls, a golden lion, a gold mixing bowl of extraordinary size. He consulted the oracle regularly. He entertained Greek philosophers at his court, most famously Solon of Athens. The story of Croesus and Solon is one of the great teaching stories of antiquity, and Herodotus tells it with the relish of a man who knows he's recording something archetypal. Croesus, flush with wealth and power, summons the Athenian lawgiver to his palace. He shows Solon his treasuries, his storerooms of gold, his jeweled throne, his armies of servants. He then asks Solon the question that only a man at the peak of his fortune would think to ask. Who is the happiest man you have ever known? He's expecting, of course, to be named himself. Solon names Tellus the Athenian, an ordinary citizen who lived well, had fine children, saw his grandchildren, and died fighting honorably for his city. Croesus is confused. He presses, who is second happiest?
Solon names two brothers, Cleobus and Biton, who pulled their mother's cart to a temple festival when the oxen were unavailable, won prizes for their strength, prayed to the goddess for the best gift a human being could receive, and died in their sleep that night at the peak of their happiness, before fortune could turn. Croesus is furious. He demands to know why the king of the wealthiest nation in the world is not considered happy. And Solon says the thing that has echoed through Western thought ever since. Call no man happy until he is dead. Because fortune turns, always. And the higher you stand when it turns, the further you fall. Croesus dismissed this as the moralizing of a man who had never been truly rich. He would remember it years later in chains. Menes, of course, knows nothing of this philosophical exchange. He knows the coins. He knows the increased production orders that began arriving from the palace after Croesus consolidated power, larger quotas, tighter deadlines, a new standard for the pure gold staters that replaced the older Electrum issues. He notices, because he is a careful man, that the new coins are different in a specific way. The lion and bull on the obverse are more finely rendered, the lines sharper, the modeling more three-dimensional. Someone has commissioned better dyes. Someone has decided that the face of Lydia should be not just reliable, but beautiful. Menes suspects this was Croesus's personal decision. The king, by reputation, cares about such things. He is not wrong. Croesus understood something about currency that many kings before and after him failed to grasp. The coin is propaganda. The coin is the state's face pressed into metal and sent into the world to be touched by thousands of hands, to be examined by thousands of eyes, to communicate wordlessly across language barriers, across borders, the character of the civilization that struck it. A beautiful coin says, we are a civilization that values excellence. A precisely weighted coin says, we are a civilization that values honesty. A coin that is both beautiful and precise says, we are a civilization worth trusting. Croesus wanted all three. Menes delivered them. Let us step back and ask the larger question that the Lydian story demands. What does money actually do to a civilization? The conventional answer is economic. It enables trade, it stores value, it functions as a unit of account. All true. But the deeper answer is social and psychological. Money creates abstraction. Before coined money, value was concrete. A jar of olive oil, a measure of grain, a sheep, an hour of labor. These things had value because they were directly useful. Their exchange was essentially a barter of utilities. The coin abstracts this. A coin does not feed you. It does not clothe you.
It does not shelter you. It is in itself useless, a disk of metal. But it can be exchanged for any of these things because everyone agrees it can be, because the king's face says it can be. This agreement, this social fiction that a stamped disk of metal is worth a jar of oil, is one of the most sophisticated cognitive and social achievements in human history. It requires trust in an institution, the state, that most people in the ancient world had never personally encountered and never would. It requires an ability to think abstractly about value that is, in its way, as demanding as philosophical reasoning. And it has consequences. When you can trade anything for anything via the medium of coin, the market becomes universal. Things that were previously outside the economy that could only be obtained through personal relationships, community obligation, or violence, enter the market. Land can be bought and sold. Labor can be hired. Soldiers can be paid. Loyalty, to a degree, can be purchased. This is liberating. It is also destabilizing. Because money, unlike relationships, has no memory. It does not care who you are, where you come from, who your father was, what god you worship. It is purely transactional. And when the purely transactional begins to colonize areas of life previously governed by tradition, kinship, or religion, things that held communities together begin to dissolve. The Greeks noticed this very quickly. Diogenes of Megara, writing in the 6th century BCE, exactly the period when Lydian coins were flooding the Aegean economy, complained bitterly that money had destroyed aristocratic values, that men of no breeding could now buy their way into status, that the old markers of worth, birth, lineage, character were being replaced by the simple, brutal marker of wealth. He was right, and he was in the world the Lydians made. The Pactolus River glitters in the morning light. Manes has walked to the riverbank on his midday break, a habit of many years. He likes to watch the current. He likes to see, occasionally, the faint gold glint in the gravel of the shallows, the tiny flakes of Electrum that the mountain is still, slowly, endlessly offering to the plain below. He knows the mythology of the river. Everyone in Sardis does. Midas, the king who wished for everything he touched to turn to gold, the king whose wish came true, who could not eat, who could not drink, who touched his daughter and watched her become a statue of cold, perfect, useless metal, who prayed for the wish to be taken back and was told to wash his hands in the Pactolus, and the gold came off his hands and entered the river. And that is why the river runs gold. Manes is not sure he believes this story, but he thinks about it often because it is, in its way, a story about the same thing he thinks about every day. The wish for infinite wealth, the consequences of that wish. The river that carries the gold without owning it, without being corrupted by it, without being destroyed by it. The river just flows. He goes back to work. But history, as Solon warned, is not interested in comfort. In 547 BCE, or thereabouts, the ancient chronology is frustratingly imprecise. A new power appeared on Lydia's eastern horizon, Cyrus the Great. Cyrus had, in a dozen years of brilliant campaigning, assembled the largest empire the ancient world had yet seen. He had overthrown the Median kingdom. He had absorbed Elam, Assyria, the cities of Mesopotamia. He was, by the time he turned his attention westward, something genuinely new in the political landscape. Not a regional power, but a world empire, with the administrative machinery and the military reach to enforce its authority from the borders of India to the shores of the Mediterranean. Croesus looked at this new power and made a decision that has been second-guessed for 2.5 millennia. He decided to attack first. His reasoning was not irrational. Cyrus's expansion was accelerating. To wait was to allow Persia to grow stronger while Lydia's buffer states disappeared one by one. Better to strike while Lydia still had allies, Egypt, Sparta, and while Cyrus was still consolidating his recent conquests. So Croesus consulted the oracle at Delphi. The answer came back in the Pythia's characteristic double-edged verse. If Croesus crosses the Halys River and attacks Persia, a great empire will be destroyed. Croesus heard what he wanted to hear. He mobilized his army, crossed the Halys, the boundary river between Lydia and Persia's Anatolian territories, and marched east. The battle, he found, was bloody but inconclusive. Winter was approaching. Croesus withdrew to Sardis, dismissed his allied contingents, and planned to reassemble a larger force in the spring. Cyrus did not wait for spring. In a move of breathtaking strategic audacity, the Persian king followed Croesus back across the Halys, advanced on Sardis, and brought the Lydian army to battle on the plain below the city. The battle that followed turned on a single tactical innovation. Cyrus positioned camels at the front of his formation. Lydian cavalry, the finest in the ancient world, broke and fled when their horses, maddened by the smell of camels, refused to advance. The Lydian army disintegrated. Sardis fell within 2 weeks. Manes is in the mint when the end comes.
The sounds of the city changing have reached him for days now. The unusual traffic on the main roads, the closing of certain market stalls, the absence of the usual Lydian garrison soldiers from their customary stations near the mint. Small things, the kind of things that a man who has spent 23 years in the same workshop, in the same city, noticing the same rhythms, would notice. He keeps striking coins, because what else is there to do? The dies are warm, the blanks are ready, the furnace is burning, the quota exists. Someone will want these coins. Someone always wants these coins. On the day the Persian cavalry rides through the main gate, not charging but cantering, in the contained and confident manner of men who have already won and know it, Manes is finishing a tray of gold staters. He looks at the coins. Lion and bull, the eternal contest. The lion of Lydia, frozen in the moment of attack. He wonders if the Persians will change the image, whether the lion will become a Persian symbol, the great lion of Persepolis, or whether the image will simply disappear, replaced by something else entirely. He wonders if the new rulers will need a moneyer. He suspects they will. Empires always need money. That is the thing about money. It does not care who strikes it. It serves whoever holds the dies. He sets the tray on the shelf and begins to clean the anvil. The occupation of Sardis, in the end, is not as violent as the city feared. Cyrus was not a destroyer. He was an administrator. He had absorbed kingdoms before. He would absorb many more, and he had learned that a destroyed city produced nothing, while a functioning city produced taxes. The mint was preserved. The muddiers were kept on. The production of coins continued, initially still Lydian in style, later shifting to Persian weights and standards, but continuous. Money flowed on. Croesus himself, here Herodotus gives us one of his great scenes, was placed on a funeral pyre by Cyrus, who intended to execute him as a demonstration of Persian power. As the flames were lit, Croesus called out Solon's name 3 times. Cyrus, curious, asked his interpreters what the king was saying. They reported the story, the Athenian philosopher, the lesson about happiness, the warning about fortune's turn. Cyrus was moved. He ordered the fires extinguished. They would not go out. The pyre was too far gone. Then, according to Herodotus, Apollo sent rain. The fires died. Croesus was saved. Cyrus kept him at court as an advisor for the rest of his reign. The richest man in the world ended his days counseling the man who had conquered him. Call no man happy until he is dead.
But the story does not end with Croesus in chains, because the thing Lydia made, the coin, escaped the conquest entirely. The Greeks had already been watching. The Ionian cities that had paid tribute to Lydia were already familiar with the Lydian monetary system. By the time Cyrus arrived, Greek cities, Aegina, Athens, Corinth, were striking their own coins, adapting the Lydian system to their own needs, their own weights, their own iconography. The Athenian owl, the Aeginetan turtle, the Corinthian Pegasus, all descendants of the Lydian lion. And through the Greeks, the system passed to Persia, whose Daric gold coins became the international reserve currency of the 5th and 4th centuries BCE. And through Persia and through Alexander's conquests and through the successor kingdoms, to Rome. The Roman denarius, the basis of every European monetary system for 1,000 years. The English penny, the French denier, the Spanish dinero, the Italian denaro, the Portuguese dinheiro, all sharing the same root word, denarius. Roman silver, struck in the Roman tradition, descended from the Greek tradition, descended from the Lydian tradition, descended from the Pactolus gold, descended from Manes and his anvil and his scale and his lion-faced dies in the mint at Sardis. Let us talk about what was lost, because Lydia was not just a monetary innovation, it was a civilization, and civilizations contain more than their most famous invention. The Lydian language, related to the Hittite family of Anatolian Indo-European languages, survived into the Persian period but was eventually replaced by Greek as the language of culture and commerce in Western Anatolia. The last Lydian inscriptions date to perhaps the 3rd century BCE. After that, silence. The Lydian religion centered on Cybele, the Great Mother, the goddess of wild places, abundance, and the untamed earth. Her worship was elaborate, sensory, physically intense, music of drums and cymbals, ecstatic dancing, priests who sometimes castrated themselves in dedication to the goddess, annual festivals that swept through her temple precincts in waves of sound and color. Lydia exported this religion westward, to Greece, where Cybele was worshipped alongside the Greek pantheon, and to Rome, where she became Magna Mater, one of the official state cults, her idol transported from Anatolia to Rome in 204 BCE as a wartime measure to secure divine protection. The Romans, in other words, were still worshipping a Lydian goddess at the height of their empire. They didn't always know that, but they were. Lydian music, the Lydian mode, was one of the 7 musical modes that Greek theory preserved and transmitted. The Lydian mode was considered sensuous, relaxed, emotional. Plato disliked it, too soft, too indulgent for his ideal republic, which probably means it was wonderful.
When medieval European music theorists codified the system of modes that would underpin Western music for centuries, they included the Lydian mode. When jazz musicians in the 20th century explored modal harmony, Miles Davis, Bill Evans, the kind of blue era, they used scales whose names descended from ancient Greek categorizations of Lydian musical character. There is a line, however attenuated, from the music of Sardis to the music of the 20th century. Things travel further than we know. Manes is an old man now. The Persians have been in Sardis for perhaps a decade. Life has continued, changed in some ways, unchanged in others. The mint still operates. The coins look slightly different, Persian motifs beginning to appear alongside the old Lydian ones, but the craft is the same, the weight is the same, the furnace is the same. He has trained 2 apprentices who are better than he is. This pleases him. This is how it should work. The next generation should surpass the previous one. Otherwise, what was the point of teaching them? He walks in the evening to the bank of the Pactolus. The river has not changed. It will not change. The mountain keeps providing. The water keeps carrying. The gold keeps appearing in the shallows, infinitesimal, persistent, undeniable. He thinks about the coins he has struck over the years. Thousands, tens of thousands. He cannot begin to count them. They are in markets across the Aegean, in Persian treasuries, in the hands of Greek merchants who have taken them as far as Egypt and the Black Sea, and perhaps beyond. Each one carries the lion's face, his standards, his precision. He will die as all men die and be forgotten as most men are forgotten, but the coins will not be forgotten. Not because they are beautiful, though some of them are, not because they are valuable, though they are, but because they changed the structure of the world. Because in every market, in every treasury, in every soldier's fist, in every merchant's purse, in every hand that reaches out and takes and gives and measures and counts, there is the ghost of a lion, struck once by a man at an anvil,
in a city above a golden river, in a kingdom whose name most people have forgotten, but whose invention they use every single day. Croesus in chains called out a philosopher's name, a king destroyed by the very wealth he had perfected. The oracle answered truly, a great empire was destroyed when Croesus crossed the Hales, his own. And yet, the coins traveled on, the mint kept striking, the Pactolus kept running, because what Lydia made was not an empire. Empires fall. Empires are always falling. That is, in some sense, what empires are for.
What Lydia made was a technology, a social technology, the most powerful kind, one that reorganizes how human beings relate to each other at the most fundamental level. And technologies, once released into the world, belong to no one, not to Lydia, not to Croesus, not to Manes. They belong to everyone who uses them, which is everyone, which is us. The Pactolus still glitters. You can go there now. You can stand on the bank of the river near the ruins of Sardis, the columns of the temple of Artemis rising above the valley, the eroded bulk of the Acropolis behind, the modern Turkish village of Sart sleeping in the afternoon heat below, and watch the water move. And if the light is right, and the water is shallow enough, and you look carefully enough, you will see it. The faintest gold glint in the gravel, still there. After 26 centuries, the mountain is still paying, the river is still carrying, and in your pocket, or your wallet, or your phone, or whatever form your money takes today, you carry something that began here, in this valley, at this river, in the hands of a man whose name we do not know, who struck a die once and changed everything. The Lydians, the people who invented money, the people who bought the world and could not buy themselves enough time, but left us something more lasting than time, left us the system by which we measure it, left us the coin, still warm from the furnace, still bearing the lion's face, still traveling, still in your hand, right now.